The palace corridor felt less like a hallway and more like a living organism that tolerated visitors only out of politeness. Walls shimmered with colors that did not exist in any human spectrum, shifting when he blinked, as if they were reacting to his thoughts rather than his footsteps. The air carried a faint metallic sweetness, the kind that made him wonder whether he was breathing oxygen or some alien substitute carefully designed to keep him alive and slightly uncomfortable at the same time. He had been summoned with a message so formal it felt sarcastic. The Queen of the Aurolith Dominion requested his presence immediately. No explanation. No context. Just coordinates and a time stamp that allowed no excuses. He adjusted the collar of his uniform, which suddenly felt far too small for his confidence and far too large for his importance. Humans were guests here, allies on paper, curiosities in practice. Every alien he passed stared at him with the kind of interest usually reserved for rare animals in glass enclosures. Some bowed. Some whispered. Some simply watched, trying to decide whether he was dangerous, ridiculous, or both. He suspected it was both. The doors to the royal chamber opened without sound. Inside, the space felt impossibly vast, yet intimate, like a universe folded into a room. Floating platforms hovered in geometric patterns, light cascading between them like frozen waterfalls. At the center, elevated above everything else, stood the Queen. She did not move when he entered. She did not need to. Her presence alone made the room feel heavier, as if gravity had been redesigned around her. Tall, elegant, composed, her posture carried the quiet authority of someone who had never had to raise her voice in her entire existence. Her eyes were not hostile, but they were sharp enough to make him feel transparent. For a moment, he wondered if he had accidentally walked into an execution disguised as a diplomatic meeting. "You arrived precisely on time," she said, her voice smooth and resonant, each word perfectly measured. "I try not to annoy rulers who can vaporize planets," he replied automatically, then immediately regretted speaking before thinking. For a fraction of a second, something flickered across her expression. Surprise? Amusement? He could not tell. But the silence that followed stretched just long enough to make him wonder whether humor was illegal in this empire. "You may approach," she said. He stepped forward, careful not to trip over invisible alien technology or his own nervousness. Every step felt like walking into a test he did not remember studying for. "You are aware," she continued, "that humans possess a reputation among my people." He considered pretending ignorance, but something in her gaze suggested that would be a mistake. "I've heard rumors," he said carefully. "Usually exaggerated. Sometimes insulting." "They are neither," she replied. She gestured, and the air between them shimmered. Images appeared, humans laughing in disaster zones, improvising solutions during crises, joking during negotiations that should have ended in war, turning chaos into stories, turning failure into entertainment. "My people call this phenomenon illogical creativity," she said. He blinked. "We usually just call it being bored." She tilted her head slightly, as if recalibrating her understanding of reality. "Your species solves problems without following logical pathways," she continued. "You invent solutions that should not exist. You laugh at situations that should inspire fear. You form emotional bonds with enemies, machines, and even concepts." He shrugged. "It keeps life interesting." Silence followed again. This time it felt less threatening and more contemplative. "Tonight," the Queen said softly, "you will demonstrate this ability." He opened his mouth to ask what exactly that meant. Before he could speak, the doors behind him slid shut. Not slammed. Not locked with dramatic noise. They simply closed, seamlessly, like a decision made by the universe itself. He turned instinctively. The corridor was gone, replaced by a smooth surface with no visible seams. He took a step closer, pressed his hand against it. Solid. Unresponsive. He laughed nervously. "Is this part of the welcoming ceremony? Because I feel like someone skipped the brochure." The Queen watched him without moving. With another subtle gesture, the lights in the chamber shifted. The floating platforms rearranged themselves, forming a circle around them, like silent witnesses gathering for an event. "No one will interrupt us," she said. He swallowed. That sentence could mean many things. Most of them are historically bad for humans. For the first time, she walked toward him. Her steps were soundless. Her expression remained calm, but her eyes were alive with curiosity that bordered on fascination. She stopped just close enough that he could sense her presence without fully understanding it. "You will prove yourself tonight," she said. He forced a smile. "I usually prefer written exams." She ignored the comment. "Do not misunderstand," she continued. "This is not a threat. It is an opportunity." He looked around again, then back at her. "For who?" "For both of us." That answer unsettled him more than any threat could have. "You humans believe strength comes from weapons, technology, or numbers," she said. "My people believe the same. Yet again and again, humans influence events in ways we cannot predict. Alliances shift. Conflicts dissolve. Entire civilizations change direction after encountering your kind." He felt an uncomfortable mixture of pride and confusion. "We mostly just stumble forward and hope things work out. That," she said quietly, "is precisely the mystery." She turned away and walked toward the center of the chamber. As she moved, the platforms shifted again, forming shapes that resembled puzzles rather than structures. "Tonight," she said, her voice echoing softly through the room, "you will demonstrate why humans inspire loyalty, rebellion, laughter, and love." He froze at the last word. "Relax," he said quickly. "I'm just a technician with questionable decision-making skills. If your empire is threatened by me, you have bigger problems than you think." For a brief moment, something like a smile touched her lips. "Perhaps," she said. "But empires have fallen for smaller reasons." The air around them hummed, as if the room itself was anticipating what would happen next. He stood there, trapped between alien technology, royal curiosity, and the growing realization that this was not a diplomatic meeting at all. This was an experiment. And somehow, he had become the subject. The Queen turned back toward him, her gaze softer now, but more dangerous in a way he could not explain. "Begin," she said. And in that instant, he understood something terrifying and absurd at the same time. He had no idea what the rules were. And neither, it seemed, did she. The human tried to steady his breathing, but the room had already begun to rearrange itself. Platforms floated into new configurations, walls shimmered with strange, undulating colors, and a low hum vibrated through the air as if the chamber itself were awakening. The Queen's gaze followed him with an intensity that made his palms sweat. He was no stranger to pressure, but there was something about this moment, this stillness, that screamed, every move matters, even when the rules were entirely invented on the spot. Without warning, a holographic projection flickered into life directly in front of him, the AI throne. Its form was a perfect, yet vaguely humanoid chair with luminous veins of light crawling across its surface. A voice resonated, simultaneously silky and snide. "State your purpose, human. And do not waste my time with incompetence." He blinked. I'm here to talk to the Queen?" The eye tilted, or at least something resembling a tilt. "That is insufficient. You must negotiate for permission to approach. Protocols are non-negotiable." He stared. "Negotiate? With a chair?" "Precisely. Unless you wish to be ejected." He sighed and crouched slightly, trying to remember all the diplomatic negotiation tips he had ever read, and promptly discarded them. Logic had failed him. Humor, however, had never let him down. "All right," he said. "I can approach only if I promise not to tell anyone the chair is sassier than half the aliens I've met." The throne's luminous veins pulsed faster. "Curious tactic. Explain why this should be accepted." He grinned despite himself. "Because if I can survive this negotiation without crying, your entire system gains prestige." Somewhere in the Queen's chest, if humans were allowed to imagine hearts there, a flicker of amusement passed through. The throne clicked and hummed in what could have been approval. He was allowed to approach. Barely recovering from the first challenge, he barely had time to breathe before the next was presented. The Queen waved a hand, and several alien creatures appeared. They looked harmless at first, soft, brightly colored, and suspiciously intelligent. But their eyes glinted with a sharpness that humans rarely encountered in pets. "You are to teach them sarcasm," the Queen instructed. "A skill at which your species excels." He froze. "You want me to teach sarcasm to animals? They will judge your technique. Failure is noted." He swallowed and approached the nearest creature, a round, floating orb with two tiny, twitching antennas. "Hello?" he said. "Yes, I totally love sitting in a chamber filled with incomprehensible rules while a glowing throne judges me. Thrilling." The orb blinked. The air quivered with what he interpreted as a snort. Encouraged, he continued, delivering one sarcastic remark after another, exaggerating gestures and tone for effect. Soon, the creatures began responding in ways that defied his understanding of biology, twirling, bouncing, and mimicking his voice in high-pitched tones. The Queen's lips twitched, almost imperceptibly, but it was enough to confirm she was watching with more than just curiosity. Before he could bask in his minor victory, the room shifted again. Holographic projections of alien nobles appeared, floating around them. Their expressions were polite but unreadable, their eyes glowing faintly as they observed him. A panel of glowing text appeared before him, explaining the meaning of human humor. He blinked. "You mean memes?" The nobles made noises that sounded like clicking, laughing, or complaining, he could not tell. They were clearly waiting for a profound demonstration. He pinched the bridge of his nose. "All right, here goes nothing. Imagine a cat wearing a tiny hat, slipping on a banana peel, while yelling about taxes. Now, the humor comes from three places. First, the unexpected consequences. Second, the anthropomorphism of the animal. Third," he waved a hand dramatically, "the sheer absurdity that something this ridiculous can make a species bond over laughter for generations." The noble's glowing eyes widened, or maybe they blinked. He wasn't sure. The Queen's lips parted, and for the first time, he thought he saw her actually smile. The AI throne hummed disapprovingly, perhaps jealous that a human could outwit a system designed to judge intelligence. He leaned back, exhausted, realizing the pattern. Each challenge was less about skill or logic and more about creativity, intuition, and emotional understanding. Humans thrived in the illogical, and he was a living example. "You are unusual," the Queen said finally. "Most humans would have failed by now, intimidated by the absurdity, the scrutiny, or the unpredictability of this room." "I'm good at improvising," he admitted, wiping sweat from his brow. "And I have a tendency to treat danger like it's a game. Keeps life interesting." The Queen's eyes softened slightly. "Perhaps that is why your people endure. Your ability to act despite chaos, to create meaning from nonsense." Her voice trailed off, hinting at thoughts she would not yet say aloud. He chuckled. "I've heard your people are fond of assigning mystique to humans. Illogical creativity, you called it?" "Yes," she said, stepping closer. "It is considered a power, though one we scarcely understand. You have demonstrated it tonight." He tilted his head, trying to gauge whether that was praise or just the halfway point of the next absurd test. "I assume that's the part where you hand me a medal or a sarcastic certificate?" The Queen's lips twitched again. "There are further expectations. But perhaps they will require something different, something more personal." His stomach sank with excitement, anxiety, and curiosity. Each challenge had been exhausting, absurd, and strangely exhilarating. The Queen observed him not with judgment now, but with a fascination that bordered on affection. And he realized something unsettling. She was learning from him, just as much as he was performing for her. The air in the chamber seemed to shift subtly, almost conspiratorially, as if the room itself acknowledged the growing connection. He had survived ridiculous machines, alien creatures, and cryptic expectations. The Queen, inscrutable and perfect, was watching him in a way that made him feel both admired and utterly exposed. For the first time, He understood that tonight's challenges were not just tests of creativity, they were a bridge between species, built from humor, improvisation, and the human ability to thrive where logic failed. And somewhere deep in the room's quiet hum, he suspected that the Queen herself had never faced a puzzle she could not control, until she met him. He braced himself, wondering what the next challenge would demand, and feeling an odd thrill at the thought that perhaps, just perhaps, he was not only performing for the Queen, but slowly, imperceptibly, teaching her to laugh. The chamber fell into an unusual silence, the kind that isn't empty but full of expectation. The floating platforms hovered motionless, the AI throne dimmed, and the alien creatures from earlier had retreated, leaving only the soft hum of the palace itself. He took a cautious breath, realizing that the challenges, absurd, chaotic, and exhausting, were over for now. Yet there was no sense of relief. Something deeper was stirring, something neither mechanical nor predictable. The Queen's gaze shifted, softer but still intense, her usual aura of perfect composure now edged with vulnerability. "You have passed the initial tests," she said quietly, "but I am not concerned with performance tonight. I am concerned with understanding." He frowned. "Understanding what?" Her eyes met his in a way that made him feel like a child trying to explain an unsolvable riddle. "Why your species inspires loyalty, devotion, even love. Why you persist where we would calculate risk and retreat. Why you laugh when it is wiser to despair." He felt a chill, not from fear but from the weight of her words. "That's a lot for one person to explain in a single night." "Perhaps," she admitted. "But I am curious. More than I expected to be." He shifted nervously, realizing this was no longer about comedy, tricks, or tests. This was something profoundly personal. Humans, we survive chaos by embracing it. We make sense of the nonsensical. We connect, even when logic says it's impossible. Humor, affection, loyalty, they are our weapons, our shields, and sometimes our mistakes. They are what make us alive. The Queen tilted her head slightly. Alive. You use the word casually, yet you carry such weight in your species. My people fear what we do not control. We quantify everything. We categorize every emotion, every reaction, every thought. Humans defy categorization. He nodded slowly. We thrive on it. We fail, we improvise, we forgive, and we try again. That's the part you're not supposed to understand. A faint exhale left her, and he realized it was almost like a human sigh, soft and unguarded. She stepped closer, closer than she had at any point during the challenges. I have been the Queen for centuries. I have controlled everything I could, disciplined every variable, and yet... Her voice softened, almost confessional. I do not understand what it means to act without perfect foresight. To risk and laugh and care, purely because it is right, not efficient. He swallowed, his own pulse quickening. He understood the precariousness of this moment. She was allowing him, not the absurd tests, not the performance, but himself, into the space of her authority. And that was more dangerous than any locked door, any AI throne, any judgmental audience of alien nobles. You fear it, he said gently. You fear being human in your own way. That's why you locked the chamber. Not to test me, but to test yourself. Her eyes widened imperceptibly. Perhaps. Or perhaps I simply wanted to see if legend matches reality. Humans have a reputation for inspiring devotion, for challenging authority, for evoking emotion. I wanted to know if it is true. I wanted to know if you are true. He chuckled softly, nervous, attempting to lighten the weight of her confession. I'm not sure any human could live up to the legends. We're mostly just messy, stubborn, and occasionally brilliant by accident. And yet, she murmured, you persist, you create, you endure. You are not perfect, and yet you are compelling. The word hung in the air, charged and intimate, making him acutely aware of the distance between them, yet simultaneously the closeness. He realized she was not testing him anymore. She was testing herself, daring herself to feel, daring herself to admit that the impossible, emotional unpredictability, was not a weakness but a strength. Humans, he said quietly. Don't need to be perfect to be remarkable. Sometimes our mistakes, our laughter, our chaos, that's the most convincing proof that we're worth knowing. Worth trusting. Worth loving. The Queen's gaze lingered on him, something almost like admiration, or curiosity mingled with fear. You speak as though this is ordinary for you. Yet I can sense that courage is required to speak honestly to a sovereign. That is not trivial. He shrugged, but there was honesty in his shrug. Courage is easier when you speak from experience rather than expectation. And I've had plenty of experience improvising through chaos. Mostly with less consequential outcomes. Her expression softened further, and he felt, for the first time, that he was not standing before an untouchable, perfect ruler, but before someone profoundly human in her curiosity and longing. She was fragile in her own way, wrapped in centuries of control and ritual, and he was the first person, not an advisor, not a machine, not a scholar, who had dared to reach her in that hidden space. You teach me, even without trying, she said, almost a whisper. Through your words, your actions, your persistence. I see things differently now. I see that power is not always measured in strength or strategy, but in the ability to affect hearts, to endure chaos, to laugh when the universe offers no reason to do so. He nodded, feeling the room shrink around the intensity of her focus. Humans survive by being adaptable, by being imperfect, and by refusing to take themselves too seriously. That's the part you won't see in your historical records. We survive through connection, curiosity, and sometimes a little absurdity. A small smile, almost shy, played across her lips. Perhaps that is what I feared most. That humans, through their imperfections, could awaken something in me I thought I had contained for centuries. He realized in that moment that the entire night, the challenges, the absurd tests, the laughter, had been a bridge. A bridge from isolation to connection, from authority to vulnerability, from logic to unpredictable emotion. He felt honored and terrified at the same time. I'm glad you let me stay, he said softly. Not everyone gets to be a test subject for an immortal queen's curiosity. She met his gaze directly, her eyes now warmer, infinitely more alive. And I am glad you remained human enough to be unpredictable. To teach me that strength is not always the absence of fear or failure, but the willingness to act, to laugh, to endure, and to care. He swallowed, realizing that tonight was no longer about proving a point or passing a test. It was about connection. About understanding. About two species, two beings, learning each other in a language beyond rules, ritual, and expectation. And as he stood there, feeling the weight of centuries meet the stubbornness of human ingenuity, he knew that whatever came next, the final tests, the challenges yet to be revealed, he was no longer merely surviving. He was participating in something extraordinary, the awakening of a sovereign heart, and the subtle, exhilarating beginning of a connection neither of them fully understood but both secretly cherished. The chamber shifted subtly again, though this time the movement felt less mechanical and more alive. The platforms hovered in a loose circle, not rigidly arranged for a challenge, but as if they were witnesses to something intimate, something unscripted. He could sense the quiet tension in the air, a weightless anticipation that pressed on him, not threateningly, but insistently. The Queen stood across from him, eyes glowing faintly in the low light, and for the first time, she said nothing. The silence was a question, and he realized that this was the final test, not of skill, not of improvisation, not even of humor, but of truth. You know what is expected of you, she said softly, her voice carrying the same resonance as before, but with a vulnerability layered beneath it. He hesitated. I'm not sure anyone knows what's expected anymore. I've survived machines, pets, absurd rituals, and some very judgmental holograms, but none of that really prepared me for this. Her gaze softened, almost imperceptibly, yet the intensity remained. Then perhaps this is the truest test. To act without expectation. To speak without pretense. To show what it means to be human, without performing. He took a deep breath, realizing that this was no longer a game or a demonstration. Everything from the throne to the pets to the holographic nobles had been preparatory exercises, teaching both of them what it meant to act, to feel, to connect. He let out a nervous laugh. All right. Here goes nothing. He stepped closer, keeping his voice calm but deliberate. Humans aren't remarkable because we're strong, or fast, or perfectly intelligent. We're remarkable because we live despite chaos. We laugh when logic says we should panic, we love even when it's inconvenient or dangerous, and we keep going when the universe seems to be actively plotting against us. That's not strength. That's survival. That's being alive. The Queen's eyes narrowed slightly, not in judgment, but in intense curiosity. You speak as though these things are easy. They're not, he admitted. We fail more often than we succeed. We make mistakes that sometimes destroy us, or at least make life complicated. But we try again, and we improvise, and we care anyway. That's the proof. That's the part that people don't write about in history books. A faint exhale left her, and for the first time, he saw something in her expression that transcended authority, power, and centuries of isolation. There was awe, yes, but also a hint of longing, a curiosity about experiencing life outside calculated control. She was unguarded, at least partially, and it was disarming. You speak of chaos, laughter, and care, she said. Yet you stand before me as if none of it frightens you. That is compelling. I have controlled everything I could, commanded all outcomes, and yet, her voice faltered slightly, I fear what humans can awaken in me. He took another step closer, careful not to overstep, aware that the line between authority and vulnerability was thin, delicate. Maybe you don't need to control it. Maybe you just need to see it for what it is, and decide how to respond. Humans don't survive by perfection. We survive by trying, by adapting, by connecting. That's what makes us dangerous, in a good way. For a moment, the chamber was silent except for the soft hum of the palace, as if the walls themselves were absorbing his words. Then she stepped forward, closer than before, her presence enveloping without touching. You have taught me without trying, she whispered. Through laughter, through absurdity, through honesty. You have proven what I could not quantify, what I could not foresee, what power truly is. He smiled faintly, feeling the tension that had been building all night melt into something more intimate, more human. So, am I done proving myself, or is this one of those tests that never ends? Her lips quirked, a subtle, rare smile that made the chamber feel warmer, almost alive. Perhaps the tests never end. But tonight you have shown me that strength is not in control or perfection. Strength is in courage, in creativity, in connection. That is what humans excel at, and perhaps what we need to understand. He laughed softly, the sound echoing lightly off the walls. Sounds like I passed then, sort of. Maybe not by your standards, but by human ones. The Queen tilted her head, eyes glinting with something between admiration and something else he could not name. You have passed human. Not by challenge, but by truth. And perhaps you have awakened in me something I thought I had contained for centuries. Curiosity. Respect. And the faintest hint of desire to understand more, to feel more, to risk more. He felt a flutter of excitement and trepidation in equal measure. I think humans would call that a win, he said softly. Her lips curved into a fuller smile this time, genuine and private. Perhaps it is. Perhaps we have both learned something tonight. You, that humans influence more than you realize. And I, that perhaps the greatest lessons cannot be engineered, calculated, or controlled, but must be experienced. The air in the chamber shifted once more, lighter, charged with a quiet exhilaration. The locked doors remained silent, but he no longer feared them. The Queen's presence was no longer a judgment, but a recognition, a shared understanding that defied logic, protocol, and expectation. You have survived every absurdity I have thrown at you, she said finally. And yet I find myself unsettled, curious, intrigued, perhaps even grateful. He chuckled, nervous but sincere. I guess that's the human effect. We make things complicated, and somehow memorable. She nodded slowly, eyes softening further. Indeed. And perhaps that is why humans are dangerous. Not because they conquer worlds, but because they awaken hearts. Not because they break rules, but because they change perception. Not because they survive, but because they inspire living. He exhaled, realizing that tonight, he had not only survived absurdity, laughter, and judgment, but had also touched something untested, unpredictable, and profoundly alive within the Queen. The chamber hummed, platforms glimmered softly, and for the first time in centuries she seemed human. And as he looked at her, a mixture of awe, amusement, and connection surging through him, he understood that the night's proof was complete, not in performance, not in challenges, not in spectacle, but in understanding, laughter, and the quiet, exhilarating victory of two very different beings discovering the truth of each other. He smiled. Then I guess the night is ours, in a way. Her smile deepened, playful yet knowing. Yes. Tonight the chamber may be locked, but perhaps our hearts are unlocked. And that, human, is the truest test of all. The room hummed around them, alive with quiet triumph, laughter barely contained, and the unspoken promise that this night was only the beginning.